Now I go further. I will take you to the scene in front of Razak Baginda's house on the night of 19th of October 2006. That was the night the last was seen of Altan Tuya. What was happening? She had arrived in front of the house of Razak Baginda in Bukit Damansara, and she was creating a commotion. Now, how do I know this? I know this because I have met private investigator Bala Subramania, who told me a lot of the story and who has also related all of it in his first statutory declaration. The first one, you must remember, there's the first one and the second one. And to today, the key question is, which is the truth? But of course, he has come out to say categorically that the first is the truth. P.I. Bala has also categorically told the Attorney General of this country, if you think my second SD is not true, charge me in court. I'm prepared to defend myself. And what is the response from the Attorney General? Silence. He's not prepared to do anything. So I will proceed on the basis that the first SD is the truth. Now, this is the interesting thing about what happened in front of Razak Baginda's house that night. What P.I. Bala says is that these two policemen arrived, the ones who were finally convicted of her murder, Azila and Siru. They arrived in the company of a woman police officer as well. They came in response to somebody's phone calls. Now, according to what P.I. Bala says, those phone calls were made by a senior police officer, Musa Safiri, I believe of the rank of DSP. DSP Musa Safiri. Now, there are many DSPs in the police force, but this DSP was a very special officer. Why? Because he was the ADC to the Prime Minister then, as DPM. Aide de camp. ADC means aide de camp. What does that mean? He is basically the personal secretary, the personal officer, the guy who is with the Prime Minister all the time, the ADC. That gentleman made the phone calls that resulted in these three police officers arriving there. That is what they say. That's not the only connection to Najib. Now, P.I. Bala is front of the house because he has been hired by Razak Baginda to deal with Altan Tuya. So this is what he describes in his statutory declaration, and I'll summarize it. He says, these policemen arrived, they went up to Altan Tuya and asked her, are you so and so? At that time she was using the name Amina. Are you Amina? She said yes, and there was a conversation. They went back to their car. Then he said, another car drove by with a Malay man driving the car with the driver's window pane down. So he said this man drove slowly, looked at the scene, and then went off. At that time he didn't know. When he did the first SD, he didn't know who that Malay man was. So in the SD, if you read it, you will see a Malay man drove, I think it was a red Proton car, if I'm not mistaken. Now, sometime last year, that same Malay man made some racially offensive speech in Malacca, where he used very insulting language against the Chinese and the Indians. And there was a big uproar. Some of you may remember that. And the man's name was exposed in the media. That man's name is Nasir Safa. And his face appeared in the internet. And P.I. Bala, when he was overseas, saw the face in the internet. He said, that's the man I saw in front of Razak Baginda's house. That's the man who drove past in the car. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the next question is, who is Nasir Safa? I'm sure some of you know the answer. Nasir Safa, personal secretary to Najib Tun Razak for 20 years. Now, don't you think that our beloved Prime Minister has got some explaining to do? Why on the night of that murder, not the murder, the night she disappeared, his ADC is making phone calls to the police, his private secretary is driving around in a car and going off, and then the two policemen and the lady policeman go up to Altan Tuya and arrest her, put her in the car, and that is the last time anybody saw Altan Tuya. The rest of the story you know. She was taken to a place, an isolated place in Shah Alam, in Bukit, shot, a huge amount of C4 strapped to her body and blown to bits. And that also raises a question. What was the intention behind blowing her body to such small bits? Why did it have to be done? What was so important about blowing her body up? Was she pregnant? Were they worried that if there was a body, it could be shown that she was pregnant? If she was pregnant, then who made her pregnant? These are questions. I'm not having answers. These are questions. And the reason why I'm able to tell you this today, why we are even having a conversation today about after 2 years, because there was a taxi driver who had to answer the call of nature suddenly nearby. And because he had to stop, he heard the explosion. If he didn't hear that explosion, we wouldn't be talking about her today. So they found the body, or what was left of the body. Then the investigation started, and you know the rest of the story. So, ladies and gentlemen, I go back to my key question, which is this. If any one of us were investigating that murder, imagine you were the police detective appointed to investigate. Don't you think that our Prime Minister has a lot of issues, or rather, there are a lot of questions that any investigator would ask of Najib Tun Razak? Is there this photograph? Were you in a restaurant in Paris with this lady? Is what P.I. Bala saying about you and the lady true? Why was your ADC making phone calls to get these 3 policemen there that night in front of Razak Baginda's house on October 19th? What is your personal secretary, Nasir Stafa, doing driving around, surveying the scene before they arrest her? Why are you sending SMSs to Razak Baginda saying, I will speak to the IGP, I will solve this, stay cool? What is your real connection with Alton Tuya? What was the real deal in Paris between you, Razak Baginda, and her? And I can go on and on about the questions I would ask. Were these questions asked? No. Were these questions asked by the prosecutors at the Aegis chambers? No. Were these questions allowed to be asked at the trial? No. What does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? That is my point. What does that mean? In the way that the Anwar Ibrahim trial has damaged all our institutions irreparably until we save this country one day, the Alton Tuya trial has also done the same thing, perhaps in a less dramatic way. And that is my point. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, it is important that the struggle for change, my colleagues have spoken about, William Leong, Elizabeth, all of them, Chi Hao, the struggle for change is important. We cannot have a country which is supposed to have a future if this is what is going to happen with our police force, our Aegis chambers, and our judiciary. The rule of law must apply to all. It cannot be different between the ordinary citizen, between Elizabeth Sivarasa and the Prime Minister and anybody else. It cannot. If the Prime Minister has done a crime, he must answer for it. Today, unfortunately, the culture of impunity is there. Not just for Alton Tuya, but also for the other victims of oppression. I will just name 2 and then I will stop because we all have to go home. And I cannot tell you those stories because that will take too long. But one day I hope the souls of Teo Beng Hok and the souls of Sarbani Ahmad and the souls of 100 over other persons who have died in custody will find peace. Because up to now, they have not found peace. The latest mockery of the Royal Commission report speaks for itself. Trying to write a scenario, a fiction, trying to concoct a version for which there's no evidence. Trying to say there was aggressive interrogation which caused him to commit suicide. And this is not my view. I just quote the president of the bar, Mr. Lim Chi Wee, a noted lawyer, who in a very succinct and analytical statement said this. He said, the conclusion of the Royal Commission involves a leap in logic and is based on no evidence at all. Simple, it speaks for itself. That they can draw that conclusion, which is a leap in logic and has based on no evidence. Why no evidence? Because two things. There were 3 psychiatrists who gave evidence, 2 government psychiatrists. The 2 government psychiatrists said, we cannot draw any conclusion, we don't have enough facts. The other psychiatrist, who was called by the Malaysian Bar, said categorically, I have studied the case, I have examined, I have talked to Teo Beng Hok's family, I have investigated all aspects, and I am very clear, Teo Beng Hok is not of a suicidal nature. He's not. He said it categorically. But the Royal Commission, full of the so-called learned persons, has concluded otherwise. So Mr. Lim Chi Wee rightly says, a conclusion which involves a leap in logic and is based on no evidence. Why? And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, the struggle for change is still on. We won the battle with the release of the EO6, but we have yet to win the war. But I join my learned friends in saying again to you, if we work together with your support, we will get there. Lawan tetap, lawan. Lawan tetap, lawan sampai menang. Terima kasih.